Hello everyone. Once again, it's Psalmist. So today I just want to speak to you about why atheism and science become unscientific when it comes to the subject of the Godhead. Now, what do I mean by that? What I mean is that the claims and everything that is written in the Bible, everything that the Bible teaches about God, can be scientifically proven. And when I'm saying that it can be scientifically proven, I don't mean that there could be a way in which you can prove that yes, there is God so everyone can see him. I'm just saying that you can prove that everything that the Bible teaches actually happened. Because a lot of atheists are saying that what the Bible says is just inventions. So the Bible is not. They're saying that the Bible is not a historical book, meaning that what happened in the Bible actually never happened. You see. So, but what do we have today? We have countries like Israel. The Bible speaks about Israel. We have in the Bible they talk about Rachel's tomb, where Jacob buried his wife in Israel. And you can go there and check for yourself. Can't you go to Israel and check whether there is no tomb, which is for Rachel? Why can't you do that? Well, atheists don't want to do that because if they do that, they would actually prove that the Bible is true. That the Bible is not only a spiritual book, but it's also a historical book. I mean, the Bible talks about Ethiopia. Ethiopia is there. The Bible talks about Greece and Macedonia. All these countries are there. The Bible talks about cities like Damascus, like Jerusalem. All these cities are there. But why can't the scientists go to these cities and prove? The Bible talks about the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah by fire and brimstone. And the Bible can geographically locate where Sodom and Gomorrah is right now, scientifically, and see whether there must have been some kind of explosion and hitting of rocks and fire and all that. You can prove that. But why aren't the scientists proving these things? Why aren't the scientists trying to prove these things? Well, the problem is that they cannot prove this because they don't want God to exist. You see, there's a difference, like I've said, there's a difference between saying that I don't believe in God. A person who says they don't believe in God will most likely be open to listen to any kind of evidence of the proof that God exists, any kind of evidence to prove that the Bible is a historical book. The Bible talks about Egypt. The Bible talks about the dynasties of Egypt. You see, but Egypt is there. Do you see that the Bible talks about the wisdom of Egypt? And we celebrate the wisdom of Egypt. Science celebrates the wisdom of Egypt by all their inventions like makeup and toothpaste and mathematics and all that. And the Bible talks about this wisdom. Yet we are imagining a sky daddy for believing in God. You see, we have so many great speakers on atheism and science, which is against God, who make unscientific statements when it comes to God, and that the scientists accept that they are scientific. You see, I've already mentioned in my previous video about the statements which are made by men like Richard Dawkins and Stephen Hawking. These are great men who are respected in the science and in the science world. These are men who are held in high regard. They have like great reputations. Everything that they say, some people immediately just believe without trying to prove it for themselves. You see, so Stephen Hawking says that in something that I read over the internet. So I don't know how true this is, but it can be true because I know that Stephen Hawking believed that there is no God. This article was saying that Stephen Hawking had proved that there is no God, that he has made calculations and he has made investigations, and he has figured out that it is impossible to have God. But I asked myself, how did he do that? How did he make these calculations? How did he he come to that conclusion. He said that there is no God, because it will be impossible for anyone to make that kind of conclusion. It is impossible. But somehow Stephen Hawking has come to the conclusion that there is no God, and because he is a great scientist, because he has a great reputation, a lot of scientists believe that. In the same vein as Richard Dawkins. Richard Dawkins in the God Delusion says that there was an experiment which they have conducted, which they were patients in a hospital, and they wanted to prove, or they wanted to see whether praying for these patients actually change their disposition in terms of being sick when they pray to God. So what we're trying to prove here was that, can God hear prayers and answer prayers? And in the God Delusion, they are saying that after prayer, they realized that there was no change in the state of the sickness of these people. But I asked myself, how can a scientist, a microbiologist like Richard Dawkins, make such a statement in a book which was a bestseller, and make it sound scientific? And somebody said, but how can it not be scientific? Well, it's unscientific because in every scientific experiment, all the factors which are going to play a role in the experiment must be defined. What do I mean by that? Well, if you're going to perform an experiment about seeing whether God hears prayers and answer prayers, do you not think that God is a factor in this experiment? He is a factor. Okay, if God is a factor in this experiment, did God agree to take part in the experiment? The answer is no. Why? Because no one has called God and said, Most High God, we want to conduct an experiment in which we want to see whether you can change the state of a person's illness because of a prayer. And then God responds and says no or yes. Then how can this be called a scientific experiment? And that is the attitude of atheists and scientists when it comes to God. Do you see what I'm saying? So I'm talking about something that anyone can validate and check. It is written in the God Delusion that they conducted such an experiment to see whether God answers prayers. But the problem is that God is undefined. Any scientist who is a scientist, who's not who's not a fake, understand that to conduct an experiment, you need all the factors which are going to partake in the experiment to be defined. Because if you have a variable in the experiment, that means you don't know how that variable is going to act in that experiment. And that means you can never conclude with the conclusion that you get and say what the results that you got are real and fact. Because you don't know what the variable, whether the variable is constant or changes. Because you don't know the value of it. Then how can Richard Dawkins say that, count that as a scientific experiment? You see, it means that that does not count as a scientific experiment. Why? Because God is undefined in the experiment. You see, but that is how science and atheists, that is their attitude when it comes to the Godhead. They make up things, they make up theories, and then they teach these theories as facts. You see, in the same vein, Stephen Hawking says that there is an intelligent life outside of our solar system, but it's not God. But why aren't scientists asking? I mean, why didn't they ask him, because he passed away? Why didn't they ask him, say, how do you know that? How do you know, first of all, that there is intelligent life outside of the solar system? Because you don't have a video to prove that there is. You don't have any recordings of you speaking to them. How do you know that? That's the first scientific question which the scientists should have asked Stephen Hawking. The second scientific question, if maybe Stephen Hawking was able to prove that he had conversations or he had videos of this intelligent life that he's speaking about, how then does he prove that intelligent life is not God? It would be like me saying that right now, as I speak to you, there is a huge fish in the Atlantic Ocean, but it's not a whale. And somebody says, but how do you know it's not a whale? Well, I'm a scientist. See, that's what scientists do. They make a statement, and obviously the scientists or the atheists, because they believe in what the scientists are saying before they even have said it. When the Christian says, "But how do you know that?" They say, "Because I'm a scientist." Because a lot of a lot of atheists, a lot of young scientists who deny the existence. When you ask them, "How do you support this standpoint that there is no God?" They say because scientists have proved it. But the question is, have you proved it? Or have you validated what they have proven? Because that's what you must do as a scientist. Look, I love science. Science is a great thing. The scientific world is a world of inquiry, the world of discovery, the world of learning and discovering new things. But the modern science is not. That's not what they do. They don't they don't discover the things. They don't make theses and try to prove. They make statements and make up things in order to support those statements. They don't have an open mind. The modern scientists don't have open minds. They have a closed mind. Their mind says this is how it is, and then everyone who is a scientist must work to support us. You see, so there's no more inquiry. There's no more, when you look at a child, when a small child is like a scientist because everything that he does it for the first time. When he speaks for the first time. When he starts seeing, literally seeing, he starts seeing for the first time. When he eats for the first time. So a child is like a scientist. So a scientist is supposed to be like a child. But what happens when a child, you know, what happens when a child says that, it is impossible that a woman can get pregnant and have a child? Because he's a child. We want an adult tell the child that this is how children come into being in the world. A man and a woman have sex, and then the woman gets pregnant, and for 9 months in the belly of the woman, the child grows, and after 9 months, the child now is ready to be born, and the child is born, and the child says, "No, I mean, come on, that's impossible. It's not gonna that thing is not gonna happen." Well, the thing about a child is that a child is gonna grow up and learn that this thing happens and accept them. But the problem is that an atheist and a scientist who say that there is no God is like a child who refuses to grow and will never grow. And because they refuse to grow and they will never grow, they remain a child. And that means that they have to continue making up stories and making assumptions to say that there is no God. And none of these things which they are making is scientific. You see, so they can even accept that, well, an explosion is too far-fetched. There has to be some kind of intelligent design. But they don't want to accept that, or they don't want to consider that intelligent design has to be God. They make a conclusive statement and say that it has to be an alien. Now the question is, how can science prove that there's an intelligent design but it's not God? And the truth is that they can't prove that it's not God. And because they can't prove that it's not God, so that means that even their very statement that there is no God must be destroyed, it must be forgotten. They are allowed to say that they don't believe in God, but they cannot be allowed to say that there is no God without proving it, especially when they are scientists. The Christian does not have to prove to the scientist that there is God. You see, because a Christian believes by faith that there is God. But the scientist, the atheist, faith is not tangible. It's not, it's not something that you can, speak to him about. It's not something that is tangible to them. It's just a belief, you see. So, but for them, every statement that they make, they have to prove. But when they come to God, they don't become scientific. They make up stories And these stories are taught as fact. One of the things that scientists have managed to do is to remove the teachings of religion in the school system. But they take their theories and teach them in the school system as fact. This is why they're saying that atheism is growing. The reason why atheism is growing is because that's what they teach in the school system. You see, let's give an example about how atheists and scientists will always support their standpoint that there is no God by making up new stories or new new theories to support the standpoint. So there was discovery that in the dinosaur bone there is still tissue in the dinosaur bone. But apparently the timeline that we are given by scientists is that dinosaurs existed hundreds of millions of years ago. So if that is to be true, it means that tissue cannot survive that long. So when this discovery was made, so they realized that means the timeline that they've given is wrong. It cannot be right. Because scientifically, they have proven that dinosaurs have tissue in their bone that they've used as proof that yes, the earth is millions and millions or billions of years old. So instead of rethinking their standpoint, instead of rethinking their timeline for the earth or the age of the earth, they make up a new thing. They say, well, the reason why the tissue could have survived is because it was full of iron. So every time there's something that contradicts what they're saying, they just give a reason, they leave it like that. So just say, oh, it's because it must have presented because there was a lot of iron in it. Well, I'm not a scientist, but the question becomes, what color becomes something which is filled with iron? Does it not become red? Well, the question becomes, what is the color of that tissue which they were using as a sample, which was found in the dinosaur bone? Was it red? If it was red, then they have a point. But if it wasn't red, then they don't have a point. Well, and the problem is that because of the reputation and the power, because science has power. Science, you have to give them respect. The Bible says to give respect to whom due respect is due. Scientists have power. So because they have power, when they say that it's because the reason why the tissue could have preserved for billions of years is because it was filled, there's no group of people, there's no scientist trying to prove that for a fact, trying to prove that in that very tissue which they discovered the dinosaur bone, there's actually iron, because you can actually scientifically prove if something has iron in it. They're saying that it was preserved by iron, but there is no proof that there is iron, unless there is, if I don't know about. But I don't know of anything or any video or any experiment which was made to prove that indeed in those very tissues there is iron in them. They just made a statement to just say, shut up, there's still no God. The reason why this dinosaur bone has tissue in it is because it has iron. It was riddled with iron. That's why it was able to survive that long. After that, the statement is closed. The statement is closed because all the scientists, the only way that you can truly continue your science work, you have to accept what scientists before you have already said. If you don't accept it, you cannot be a scientist because you're not going to get any funding. It was shown in the documentary about No Intelligent Design Allowed, about how a lot of scientists get victimized because they contradict mainstream science in saying that there is no God or there's no intelligent design. You see, so wherever there is anything about which can prove or contradict the statement that there is no God, or anything that can prove that there is a God, atheists become and scientists become unscientific. They make statements, and these statements are supported because they have power. They have power in the media. They have power in politics. So they make this statement. These statements are printed, and after that, all the science is accepted because it was proven by science. So that's all that I have to say about how atheism and the scientific belief that there is no God is unscientific, and how the scientists and the atheists will always go out of their way to deny anything that may contradict their standpoint that there is no God, and how if in their very statements that they have made there is contradictions, how they will always just make up a new theory and a new statement to prove that, to continue their belief that there is no God. And that is all that I have to say. If you have anything to say about this topic, you can leave your comment below. And if you love content like this about atheism and about God, you can just subscribe to my channel so you can receive content like this. Thank you for listening.